Well, this isn't the first time Vampire Bloodlines 2 was been in the headlines for being interesting. Very, very progressive video game, if I do say so myself. Now, that in and of itself is not a negative at all. It's just interesting how far people are willing to take their, I don't know, softness in the video games. Apparently, there are now trigger warnings in the video game. At this point, okay, so at this point, this is actually okay. So at this point, I don't understand why anyone would be excited for Vampire the Masquerade 2, not because any of my subjective opinion, but because of the game. This is a game that its developers have said is not for the male or classic audience. Not only have they said this, they've repeated how you, the average male gamer, is not their target audience and have censored people voicing opinions to the contrary to their stated goals. They've discussed how they're moving beyond toxic masculinity and are aiming for another mythical audience. Now, this is on One Angry Gamer, which oftentimes, they'll have good stories and then sometimes they just kind of fly off the handle. So it's not a site I often cite as an only source, but there are quotes from the actual developers that support a lot of this stuff. They go on to write, "This is a game coming from a publisher more interested in pushing identity politics than they are at serving their established base. Thus baffles my mind why anyone of a family or game." So we have Kara Ellison, the game's senior designer, has discussed in a forum post how the game will have trigger warnings and content descriptors to help people who might have PTSD. She writes, 100% yes. We are absolutely concerned that there's some kind of the game that could be difficult for players living with trauma or mental health issues. For Malkavians, we want to make sure to describe to the player what they may experience when playing, but what may be difficult for us is making some systemic or scripted events turn on or off selectively. We are moving away from the fish milk portrayal of this iteration of Bloodlines, so we expect them to be much more unsettling or scary experience this time around. Rachel and I have discussed ways to be kinder to players who might have PTSD issues in particular, and one of them's things we are considering to pitch to the team is part of accessibility menu where we outline the thematic content of each mission so you can prepare yourself ahead of time. Why even play the game? And look, look, as long as it's not baked into the game, right? As long as it's not something everyone has to deal with and it's just an option you can turn on or off, cool. Totally fine with it. Totally fine with that existing, of course. If you need to turn trigger warnings on in order to play a video game, I don't know, maybe just don't play that video game. There are a lot of Nintendo games out there that, unless you're afraid of mushrooms or something like that, you should be fine with. So that way we're not changing the experience, but we're giving you space and time to consider when you'd like to continue. Does that sound a good idea to you? This is still all being worked out, of course, but we really care about it. And you can see some other coverage here. Vampire Bloodlines 2 senior narrative designer said they are very concerned about people being triggered by the game and are giving them the option to skip entire missions. Gamers are concerned that Vampire Bloodlines 2 might offend their sensibilities or trigger their PTSD. Or PTDS. That's a typo. Jesus. No wonder I never use this site. But the developers assure them that they don't have to play the game to complete it. Everyone is offended by something, and now people are worried that Vampire Bloodlines 2 might have a dialogue, themes, or gameplay that will trigger them. Usually, in these cases, gamers could opt to not purchase games that they don't like, or at least express how much they dislike the game after the fact. Sadly, that is not the case anymore. Developers are being coerced into censoring their games. Maybe. The highly anticipated sequel to one of the greatest pen-to-paper role-playing game adaptations, Vampire, developed by Paradox Interactive, is facing the same issues. Kara Ellison, senior narrative designer for Bloodlines 2, responded by saying that they're implementing plenty of trigger warnings and even giving players the opportunity to skip entire missions. And that is on top of the other things that Vampire the Masquerade's Bloodline 2 is doing, including but not limited to, adding pronouns and putting in modern day politics. If you remember, I covered this at the time. Quote, the character creator, which players get to use twice, once at the start to define your human aspects and a second time later in the game to flesh out your vampire, goes way beyond basic male and female models. Body type, gender pronouns, employment history, and fashion can all be toyed with for a very modular build. However, things do continue. One of the reasons we went to Seattle for Bloodlines 2 is there is a lot of conflict in Seattle that is a microcosm of a lot of conflict that's going on all over the place. It felt like a good place to start to ground it. The conflict between tradition and progress, conflict between money and artistic endeavors. A lot of those conflicts are happening right now, and they're very real. It seems like the perfect place to dig into something that feels very modern in terms of the conflict and also very timeless, grounding it in 2020, but also very much descendant of what the original game was. They continue. One of the reasons why that particular conflict attracted us so much is because it's inherently political conversation. It's one of the few ones where it's hard to, there are valid approaches. The world has to move forward. Right. Yeah. And I know that I want my games to, address current political issues. This is a big deal for me. I don't get enough of it on Twitter, Facebook, on the news, in my conversations. I need it in my video games. The one thing I have to escape, to try and go relax and get away from some of the insanity out there. No. I definitely want it in my video games. Now, you could argue, don't want it, don't buy it. And that's exactly what I intend to do. They continue, sorry. It is a political game, but I think it's one of the few opportunities that gives us a chance to let people make their own political statement in a way that's not cheap. I don't believe you can look at both sides of a political argument without understanding both sides. Well, that's good to hear. It's very easy to say this is good and this is bad, but it's definitely taking some political stances on what we think are right and wrong in terms of the main conflict and what is interesting. It's one of those truly balanced issues. So you say it's difficult to, you say in one breath that things are not black and white and there are, issues are murky, but then you go on to say, oh yeah, but the game takes a stand on what they think. The quotes continue. I often look like, how would someone feel spicy in this situation? She explained. And there are definitely characters in there that will be shipped like mad. Everyone in the studio is like, yeah, I would definitely go for that one. He's my bae kind of stuff. They're very often very unusual choices. Well, that's not very progressive to be objectifying your video game characters. She also said they're trying to broaden Bloodlines 2 from a more masculine power fantasy of the original so that it appeals to way more people this time. Well, I have obviously no issues with offering, if you're going to write a story for, men and women, that's cool. You write the story in a way where certain love interests might appeal to you or certain things. I'm 100% for that. More choice is better, obviously. I don't like, however, framing it in a way where it's like, well, this old thing is bad because men, and now we're going to make it better. But they did phrase it they said they want the game to appeal to more people. Now, obviously, women play masculine video games all the time and vice versa. Allison also states, I feel like the politics have changed, obviously. So I think the first game was kind of its time. So now the politics have moved on. So we're trying to write to the politics of now. So there's a lot more kind of things that have changed. So topics that we might like to discuss, we would push totally differently from the first one. So we're thinking about that too. Now, some people might use the excuse, who cares? Vampires the Masquerade has always been about politics, and that is true. However, most people were engulfed in the game's in-lore politics, not real-world politics, pulled out of the headlines today. Just like the original Blade movie was steeped in politics, but it was in the lore. Vampire politics not entirely related to the micro-politics of inter-societal squabbles and subculture dissension. It's going to be interesting. I don't think this is going to affect sales. I think as long as it's something you can turn on, you're not ruining, so to speak, the experience for 100% of the people to protect 0.01% of the people, I'm fine with that. Make it an option. Let people that need it turn it on. Totally cool with that. What makes me more unlikely to buy the game is the continued talk about bringing modern day politics in. You know, you see, she also said that they're trying to broaden Bloodlines 2 from a more masculine strategy. It's a political game. One of the reasons we went to Seattle, you know, we want modern politics. These are things that make me not want to play the game. I hope you enjoyed this video. We'll talk to you again real soon.